Democratic Party I grew up in always had trouble fundraising because the groups that it could fundraise were very limited. They could fundraise from trial lawyers, they could fundraise from unions, but most of the big corporations were off limits to them. You know, a really pure Democrat wouldn't take any corporate money, which meant, you know, it's hard to win elections. Meanwhile, the big money, you know, was going from the oil industry, the coal industry, the pesticide industry, the big food, big ag industry was mainly going to Republicans. There were a lot of Midwestern ag state Democrats that were taking money from Cargill and Monsanto and Smithfield and Purdue and Bo Pilgrim, et cetera. But Democrats wouldn't take pharmaceutical money.
I thought we'd start with something a little bizarre, because obviously there's plenty to talk about, and the world seems to be in a bit of a chaotic place. But on the way here, as I was in the car, I looked at your Twitter, and I want to read your last tweet, because I think this encapsulates a lot of people's frustrations with what's going on here in California. You wrote, "Yesterday, an intruder climbed the fence at my home and was arrested. After being released from police custody later in the day, he immediately returned to my home and was arrested again." So twice in one day at your house, you mentioned that your wife Cheryl was doing a Facebook live stream at that moment. Is that a perfect example of the frustrations that people are having in this town, in this state, and really across the country at this point?
Yeah, I was, because you were with me a few minutes ago when I learned that was up on my Twitter, and I didn't really want to put it up on my Twitter because I didn't want to seem like I was whining, but my wife saw him come over the fence when she was doing a Twitter space Facebook Live or Instagram Live. And then she saw these wonderful guys from Gavin DeBecker, the security guys, with their guns drawn, chasing him and putting handcuffs on him. But he was an intruder who had written me over 400 emails over the recent months, including many menacing ones. A week ago, one that threatened to put a bullet in my head. And so, you know, it's one of several incidences that have happened recently, including a guy who showed up in LA at a theater in Wilshire when I was doing a rally and asked for me, and he was wearing a U.S. Marshal badge, a lanyard badge, and a federal ID, and these guys spotted him because they thought the badge was too shiny, and he asked to see me. And they pulled him aside. He had 2 shoulder holsters on that were fully loaded with each one with the magazines loaded with 8 bullets. He had a backpack on with another gun in it loaded, and he had, I think, 4 or 5 extra magazines and knives and other weapons in there. And his house later on was filled with rifles. And he had given created a TikTok that said, if I don't come back from this, contact your commander-in-chief, etc. So it was, we've repeatedly asked the Biden administration for Secret Service protection. I'm the only candidate in history who has asked for a presidential candidate who has requested Secret Service protection and been denied. Most people they legally have to give it to you 120 days out, but customarily is given. My uncle got it 500 days out, Teddy Kennedy. They made Secret Service available to candidates during the primaries after my father was killed. And ever since then, people are just pro forma given. I think Obama got it 500 days out. I'm now 365 days out. So many candidates have gotten it much earlier than me. It's disturbing to me because I'm watching the politicization of the other law enforcement agencies. And when my father got into the Justice Department, the first day in the Justice Department, he called all the attorneys together, and the one thing he said to them is, we are not going to politicize justice in this country. And during my tenure at this agency, that there's going to be no politicization. You know, Democrats and Republicans are going to be treated the same. And he gave that as an ironclad order. President Biden has a statue of my father behind him in the Oval Office, and his family members get Secret Service protection. Anthony Fauci has $1 million of Secret Service protection a month. You know, and people don't like him, so he's entitled to it. John Bolton, years after retiring, has Secret Service protection, as do many other officials. And it's politicization. You know, I imagine, I don't know why they're doing it exactly, but I think that they understand it's very, very expensive for me, and that they'd rather me be spending money on my protection rather than, on advertisements or organization or field organization. So that's wrong. Now, I just want to say this, that I'm involved in a number of lawsuits against the administration, against the government, and against... One of those suits is now in front of the Supreme Court, Kennedy versus Biden. And it has a companion case, Missouri versus Biden. We got a lower court decision from Judge Doty that's 155 pages long. That decision is, Americans should have to read it in civics class, because it shows what happens when you politicize the law enforcement agencies. It shows that President Biden, I was the first person censored by the administration 37 hours after he took the oath of office. President Biden, the White House was ordering Twitter and Facebook and Instagram to remove my accounts and threatening them that if they did not do so, that the White House was going to try to remove their Section 230 immunity, which is existential for them. They could not, their companies would die if they didn't have that Section 230 immunity. And what we found from the Twitter files and from our discovery documents is that the White House, because of pressure from the White House, Facebook and the other social media sites provided portals to the FBI to go in directly and censor material. And the FBI gave access to the CIA, the DHS, to the IRS, and to about 12 other federal agencies. So you had, listen, I've been censored for 18 years, but not officially by the government. And, the New York Times and CNN won't put me on, none of them will do that, but they're allowed to. That does not violate the First Amendment. If you own a printing press, you can choose what to print and what not to print. If you own a cable station, you're not using the airwaves, but if you own a cable station, you can decide what to censor and not to censor. But when the government begins telling you to censor things, now the First Amendment is implicated, because that's exactly why we passed the First Amendment, to make sure that the government could not silence its critics. And I'll say the last thing, that a government that can silence its critics has license for every atrocity, because if you can quiet criticism about yourself, there's no end to the power that you can then claim.
So I guess that's a great segue. I know a lot of people obviously want to talk about what's going on in Israel, and we'll get to that. But that's a great segue to what has happened to the Democrat Party. The day that you announced, I said on my show, and my audience tends to lean a little more conservative now, I said to my audience, by the end of this thing, I don't know that he will be a Republican, but he will not be a Democrat. And you are now running independent. And I said it on my show. We'll send you the clip. I said it the day you announced. It was obvious. I had seen, Dennis mentioned the Why I Left the Left video that I did. I've seen that path, even just from chatting to some of the people here this evening. They're on that path as well. I think a lot of people are waking up. But what do you think happened really to that party that has led to the radicalism and or I would argue, utter incompetence that we're seeing right now?
No, I think a couple of things happen. One is the Democratic Party was interesting because the Democratic Party I grew up in could not. I watched this evolution happen because I was involved in the medical freedom issues, and that was really the spear tip of what happened to the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party I grew up in always had trouble fundraising because the groups that it could fundraise were very limited. They could fundraise from trial lawyers, they could fundraise from unions, but most of the big corporations were off limits to them. A really pure Democrat wouldn't take any corporate money, which meant it's hard to win elections. Meanwhile, the big money was going from the oil industry, the coal industry, the pesticide industry, the big food, big ag industry was mainly going to Republicans. There were a lot of Midwestern ag state Democrats that were taking money from Cargill and Monsanto and Smithfield and Purdue and Bo Pilgrim, etc. But Democrats wouldn't take pharmaceutical money. And then in 2016, when they were fighting, when President Obama was fighting over Obamacare, or in the years preceding 2016, 2012 to 2016, the Democrats, the Obama administration had to make a deal with the pharmaceutical companies in order to get Obamacare through. Because if the Pharma is the biggest lobbyist on Capitol Hill and they could block it, they have more. They paid twice in lobbying what the next biggest, which is oil and gas, and about 5 times what the military contractors pay. So they are off the charts in how much they invest in lobbying. And the Obama administration had to make a deal with them, and the deal they made is that we're going to do Obamacare, and we are going to buy without bargaining. We're going to buy everybody your drugs, and you're going to get really rich, and we won't bargain for them. We won't, push you down. So they got them on board. At that point, it became permissible for Democrats to take pharmaceutical money, and they just started taking it.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop screaming, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.